Brought to you by Dale Carnegie of Orange County. This is the 411 on Leadership podcast, where we discuss common sense leadership practices with executives in Southern California to transform you into the leader people want to follow.
Good Monday morning. Welcome to the 411 on Leadership podcast. Good morning, Mr. Thomas. Just go with it. Just go with it. Just make it happen.
So, good morning, everyone. The reason how we're laughing is because we actually had a conversation earlier mentioning how when we first started with the podcast, we would not know when to actually start the podcast when we went viewing, and so we were just joking around about that, saying that we got it all down, and lo and behold,
here we are.
The cue.
So who brings us here this morning, Steve?
Everybody, welcome. This is the 411 on Leadership podcast. We're brought to you by Sitch Radio. Talk to our man, Brian. I promise you, he'll provide you the right cues that when you do your podcast, you'll know exactly when to go on and when to record. So if you want to start your own podcast, if you want to get your story, if you want to utilize your podcast and get other people's stories out, then I encourage you to talk to our man, Brian. He is at sitchradio.com. And if you're liking this content, John, what do our listeners do?
Well, hey, if you like it, it would mean so much to us if you would subscribe, comment, like it, whatever platform that you're on with us today. If you're on podcast, if you're watching this from a previous episode, YouTube, LinkedIn, whatever it is, please leave a like, a share. If the content is something you're interested, we want to hear from you because you help make this show happen. And every week, if you're posting live, or even if we can come back later and comment on some of those things and help answer some questions from you. So we want to hear from you.
And we can add on that as well, John, even throughout this podcast. If you have questions, go ahead and put that in the chat. If you're listening to this either on Facebook or on LinkedIn Live or even on YouTube, go ahead and put those questions in there. We want to address those as soon as we get them.
I got to say something because our good friend Todd has already posted. He's the one that was on our second episode ever where I had to miss it, and you were on with Steve, and Todd saying love it because he was here for some of the original ones. Todd is the expert at podcasting. If you haven't checked out EM Weekly, Todd runs multiple shows actually here through Sitch Radio. So thanks, Todd, for checking in with us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, we are excited to talk today about inclusive leadership, and inclusive leaders are risk takers. And I'm personally excited. I know we both are, John. We're excited to have this particular guest join us. Her name is Geri Cerkovnik. She is the CEO and owner of Business Empowerment Incorporated. She runs our Dale Carnegie office here in partnership with Steve Verberg. And so as a business entrepreneur, Geri has a proven track record of working with organizations of all sizes, from Fortune 500 companies such as Nortel and Verizon to developing new strategic markets for startup companies. Now, as she is the CEO and owner of Dale Carnegie of Orange County here in this area, she uses Dale Carnegie's training methods to sharpen professionals and transform companies into successful, profitable, and focused organizations. As great as Geri is in running our Dale Carnegie office, she does an even greater job in the work that she does in the community. Geri serves on the following boards, which is the Girl Scouts of Orange County, Glenwood Foundation, Lighthouse Group, and I-5 Freedom Network, which we know that Brenda is running. That's some nonprofit
been a guest with us
organization. Yes, she has. And so she also serves on the Aliso Viejo Community Association. So Geri, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule. Welcome to the podcast. Sorry you had to be... Sorry you had to come in and see my little mishap. I decided John's perfect. But my little mishap in the beginning. But we just want to say how much we enjoy having you and we welcome you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And I have to admit, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing and really appreciate your hearts as you go out there wanting to influence other leaders and make an impact in the community. As some of you guys know, for us, the mission that we have at Dale Carnegie is to impact the world around us by making a difference in each person's life that we come across. And that's something that we strongly believe and is the core of what we do. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing here, because you're actually making a difference in other leaders' lives.
Well, thank you so much, Geri. We definitely appreciate it. Well, tell us, Geri, about your leadership journey. And as we're talking about leaders, inclusive leaders being risk takers, how has risk taking played a role in your leadership journey to this point?
So first, I should start off with giving you a baseline about my philosophy of life, right? And as some of you guys know, I am a person who strongly embraces do not go where the path may lead, but instead blaze your own trails and make your own paths, right? So that's kind of a fundamental of who I am and who I've always been throughout my life. Many people that know me probably would say risk-taking is a fundamental aspect of who I am.
Yeah.
When I started my career, I started with a company called Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company, which later got included as part of an organization called Bell Atlantic, and what you guys now know today is Verizon, right? And so while I didn't know it, I started off in a large corporation. I had just come fresh out of engineering school, and I had the opportunity to go into a brand new area that at that time the telephone company was trying to branch into, and that was data services. And back then it was so exciting. We had dial-up modems. They were going at 56K.
Watch out now. A lot of people don't know about that. Watch out now.
And then from there, we started branching out into a technology called ISDN. And we lovingly referred to that internally as I still don't know. And so from that, what I was very fortunate enough to discover was my entrepreneurship in a large enterprise.
Okay.
I was at that time then we had become Bell Atlantic. We were trying to branch out into the data services arena, trying to figure out how to explore and to go new places. And that actually really started, I guess, honing in some of my entrepreneurial spirit and taking risks, because we had to go out and identify, what were some of the data technologies that we wanted to look at, explore, and develop, right? And one of the biggest blessings that I got out of that experience when I started at Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company, they gave me a mentor, right? His name was Fred Howard. He was probably one of the most kind people, wise people that I ever met. And one of the things that he shared with me was the fact that as I was learning and growing and exploring in my career, I should take and look at what other leaders were doing, both the good and the bad. And he said I would gain much wisdom and spare myself a lot of pain by looking at what they did and figuring out what I wanted to take and incorporate into my leadership style. And so part of that became risk-taking, because every assignment that I started to get at that corporate level was taking a risk and trying to introduce, new technologies. And from that, I learned that, risk-taking isn't bad, right?
Yeah.
It can be a really good thing. And there are going to be times when you're going to forge ahead and you've done your homework and you've gotten, on the right path. And there are going to be times where you've kind of run off, maybe not done all of the homework that you needed, and maybe it wasn't such a good experience. So, but I was very appreciative because I had that mentor that I could always go to and turn to, and I trusted, the advice and the wisdom that he provided. And that really helped as I was starting my career to be comfortable in taking some of the risks that I took.
Yeah. If you're joining with us this morning, we are joined by Geri Cerkovnik, the CEO of Business Empowerment and co-founder of Business Empowerment in Orange County, and a serial risk taker, serial entrepreneur. If it's okay, Jerry, I want to step back a little bit in your story, because I think this is even key who you are as a person, as a risk taker. If you're listening, ladies that are out there, because Jerry, you got into a field which is historically male dominated. I mean, if there's those terms like patriarchy that you hear so much in today's world, I mean, you jumped in, and I'm guessing, share with us a little bit what that was like as a woman going in, as a young woman jumping into engineering. And was it you alone as far as female most of the time, or were there others around you? And what was that experience like?
So when I started into engineering school, the first year was, a number of core programs, and there was probably 5 females throughout the entire core. And that included things like civil engineering, industrial engineering, and electrical engineering, which is the one that I had pursued.
Yeah.
And as I started homing in on some of those electrical engineering programs and courses, I was the only female in my classes.
Okay.
So
even all the way back, starting in college and going through schooling, it was you as one of the only females in the engineering program.
This is very true.
Wow.
And
so
it
trailblazer.
Was,
I cut you off, but you have a moniker, trailblazer. So you started that going through even from the early stages. So I jumped in there. Sorry, keep going.
No. I have to admit, when you're in that environment, you don't really. I guess I never really kind of looked at the fact that I was the only, female that was in there.
Yeah.
I had just a lot of other people, that were there. And I guess, engineering school also kind of conditions you from the standpoint, because you have quite a bit of diversity, right? Because that's where, you get probably one of the bigger mixes of diversity as, you work through it. In fact, one of my roommates, when I first started out, she was in civil engineering, and she was from Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And her and I would kind of talk, and it was very interesting to learn about her background and her culture. So I really enjoyed that. And then, throughout my career, I got to meet some of the most amazing people from all over the world through my engineering classes. So I really enjoyed that.
So, Jerry, one of the things you mentioned in your story, you talked about times where, you've taken risks and they've been, the payoff has been great. But then there are some other times where you've taken risks and it didn't go as well as you would like. Tell us about, one of those times, and what would you say is the most impactful lesson that you've learned from, taking a specific risk, but then it not paying off or working the way that you would have liked it to work out?
So, So I'll tell you a good one, and then I'll tell you how it led into the one that maybe could have been better, right? So a lot of people, when I was getting ready to leave Bell Atlantic, and I was in some of the executive positions and was moving up through that organization, I had an opportunity where somebody from California recruited me to a tiny startup out here in California. All my colleagues back there kind of thought I was a little bit crazy because I was on, an executive path within Verizon. And so, but I just really had this desire to try something on my own. And I came out here and with a startup company. And that one did, okay. I wouldn't say, one of the ones of the ballpark, right? And then went to another one and it did okay too, right? And so I'm starting traction going and I'm getting really excited, right? And then back in the 90s, I decided that this thing that was just coming out, it was called hotspots, right? And they were just getting ready to start. And, it truly was a nation of Wi-Fi. So I was all gung ho. I knew this was the future. I knew this is where, going to be going, in the future years. And so I took and decided I was going to start my own company, right? And do it totally on my own, because now I've had these successes, in these other startup companies. So I had all that excitement, energy, and drive, right? I knew this was it, right? This is going to be the one where I hit it out of the ballpark. So I started up a company. It was called By the Wave. How do you connect to the internet? By the Wave. And
You're
so
surfing.
exactly. So I was so excited and, gung ho, and I was putting a lot of time, talent, and effort into it. And this is where I realized that when you do risk taking, you really need to look at calculated risk taking, right? This is where I really started to understand that full concept. So, was the technology right? Yes. Was where I was going with it right? Was I leading the way on it? Right. I was, building the team. One of that I started to understand through that experience that wasn't a successful startup, by the way, was the fact that there's a curve, in a life cycle of any product, right? And it's not always the person that kind of hits at the very beginning and founds this great idea as a leader that they're going to take and run with, but it's really about the timing. And I started to understand how important a life cycle curve was. And so I started at the very beginning of the life cycle. And truthfully, what I found as I've analyzed things over the years, the people that come in more at the early adopter stage, but at the tail end as it's just starting to take off, those leaders, those risk takers are the ones that normally fare a lot better than those starting at the beginning. And that's whether you're a small company, like my small little By the Wave company, right?
Yeah.
Or you're a large one. And the example that I'll give you there is a few years ago, you guys heard about Google Glass, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was something that was really going to be out there, and it was exciting.
We're all
and
wearing them now, right?
exactly,
Yes.
So, and I actually did some software development for Google Glass, right? And I was all gung ho, with that as well. But even big companies sometimes don't take and analyze that life cycle curve properly, right? And they take a risk, just like Google did. They took a risk. They were coming out with these Google glasses. They know it's the future, right? But they didn't hit the curve right. So as a risk taker, one of the things that I learned as a leader is if I'm going to take those type of risk, I need to gather and collect good data points, right?
Yeah.
And the way I do that is also by having a team around me that helps keep me in check to analyze it without my Google glasses on.
Yeah.
Well, we want to give acknowledgement. We've got several people who've chimed in, said hello this morning. So thanks so much, Kay and Yamuna, Tony, Richard. Appreciate you joining us this morning. We know that there's several of you out there. Thanks again for being with us. If you've got questions, make sure you leave them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them as we have this conversation with Geri this morning. Really appreciate you joining us and talking about how inclusive leaders are risk takers. And what does that look like, Geri? We've talked about, we know that you've got the experience from the starting a business. What does that look like within the organization when you're in the trenches on a day-to-day working with people? How does that risk taking kind of play out that you see, from a leadership perspective?
One of the things that, when I was in my Bell Atlantic career, that came to fruition, and we really kind of emphasized this leadership development, was the shadow of the leader, right?
Okay.
And so a lot of times we as leaders don't realize the shadows that we cast on our team, right? And so for a strong leader, right, to really flourish, I think it's so important. What my mentor told me was, Geri, as you're building a team, you need to put people around you that aren't yes people.
Oh, okay.
You need people that will challenge you, that are willing to challenge you, right? You need a diversity of thought. You need a diversity of perspective, right? And so from looking at, how to be inclusive, right? A lot of people feel comfortable with just having people that are like them, that think like them around them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was always taught to make sure you build a team that challenges you, right? If you want to see your true potential, if you want to see where you're going.
Okay.
So one of the things like we do at our company, for example, we're a small company, there's 7 of us. And if we look at bringing, say, a new person onto our team, we have a very inclusive interview process, right?
Yeah.
So we take and we look at doing a thorough interview such that everybody in the team gets to participate.
Yeah.
Right. So the executive team looks at them, and then our sales team looks at them, and our administrative team looks at them. And we all get to see, you know, how is this person going to fit, you know, in our organization? Because especially for small companies, culture is so important,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things that we teach at Dell Carnegie is there's, you know, all these attributes that people can bring. And a lot of times when we're hiring, we'll look at the technicalities of the skill set that they bring. But one of the things that's really important as a leader is first you need to look at the attitude the person brings, right? And they might not have all the skill sets, but if they don't have the skill sets and they have a good attitude, it is so easy to bring them in and to help train them. And then one of the other things, you know, from an inclusive standpoint is once you bring that person in bold, don't forget why you hired them, right? They come in with certain talents that they bring.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, the familiarity that sets in. And it's like, oh, you know, well, you know, Steve, I can go to him anytime, right? And I forget like the amazing person and the amazing talent that he has and what he can bring. So it's to really, you know, if you're trying to be an inclusive leader, don't forget, you know, why you hired them, what talents that they bring. And then also I would say you want to do what Dell Carnegie calls is the inner view, not the interview, but the inner view. And that's where you get to come along beside each person on your team and understand what their goals and objectives are. Where do they want to be in the future and how do they want to get there, right? Because we all realize that there are seasons in everybody's life, right? And certain seasons they're to be in one area and certain seasons they're to be in another area. So if we want to help them grow, which then helps us grow in our company, then it's important to take time to really spend with them and interview them, right? And find out, you know, about them personally, right? And sometimes through that interview, you yourself will realize that, you know, they need to be something and you have to help grow them to get them there, right? And so that's one of the biggest risks that the leader will take, right? Because then you see some vulnerability, right? And you think, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose this great talent. And yet, you know, that for the better of everybody, you know, you have to help them grow to get to that place.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that inherent risk right there, where if you talk about those that don't take any type of risks, I mean, that's going to lead to what? Complacency. That's going to lead to, you know, stagnation, and it won't lead to growth. And so, you know, it's for leaders, and that's particularly challenging right now, especially if we're talking in context of, you know, the Great Resignation and so that are leaving. You know, I mean, it's a risk for us sometimes to tell our people, or at least, you know, encourage, you know, our people to move to that next step, because for us it could be a risk to our organizations. But I think that's what it takes when we're talking about being that impactful leader, and not just a manager or a leader, but that impactful leader where it's about the other person's growth and it's about looking out for them and saying, hey, I'm going to risk our team during the interim here, you know, as we're trying to, you know, find things or make things right. But then saying, hey, you know what, Geri, we know that you've got goals and aspirations. And I know that because we've had conversations. I know that you have this goal and this goal. You know, I have to let you go in order for you that. And that's where, that's what we're talking about, this level like leader, where we're talking a substantial impact on other people's lives. So we're talking with Geri Cerkovnik here on the 401 on Leadership podcast. And I'm so glad you all can join us. And so as we're beginning to land the plane as it relates to this conversation, and this has been so great, and I wish we had more time for this.
Scratch the surface. We'll have to bring you back, Geri.
Yeah, that's gonna happen.
5 straight episodes with Geri.
For those that know Geri, we all know how much Geri loves to be in front of the camera. Actually, she doesn't. As a matter of fact, this is a risk for her to be in front of the camera. That's why we're just so grateful to have you and just share.
Right.
So, with that, what would you say what is one practice that you would pass on to leaders that they can adopt this week for them to be or for them to take more calculated risks as they're leading their people?
I think especially with where we're at today and all the things that have gone, right? As a leader, it's very important right now to really take us back and assess culture that is going on in an organization, right? Because with everything that's going on, your culture's probably been impacted.
Right.
And you want to make sure that you understand in what way it's been impacted, right? Because we all have to start now trying to figure out how to start strategizing, right? And planning our future. And to that, we really need to have a firm foundation and understanding of where we're at, right? I have this saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Yeah.
Right. And so
trailblazing, Geri.
Exactly. So we first have to start out with our baseline and figure out where we're at as a leader right now, and figure out where the culture is. And then, when I go just really focusing on doing those interviews, right? Because a lot of transition has happened over this last year. A lot of people have had, different priorities and things have coming up, right? So we really need to kind of step back and take the assessment. And right now, if you're planning on taking a risk and trying to figure out, what your new normal is going to be going forward in the future, start first by analyzing where you're at. And then it'll help you as you're strategizing on figuring out where you want to be. Right.
Yeah.
And there's a really good quote that I tried to memorize here that Mr. Carnegie talks about from a risk-taking standpoint. And he says, the person that goes the farthest is generally the one who does or dares.
Wow.
The sure thing boat doesn't get far from the shore.
That's good. That's when you think about the visual imagery of that. Wow, thank you for sharing that, Geri. We had a question that came in from one of someone who's listening with us today, and Todd asked, do you find that leaders and risk takers are more curious than not?
In my experience, strong leaders and great leaders are always curious. They're always asking questions. They're always trying to look beyond, right? Because they're actually focused on a vision that they have. And so they have to ask a lot of questions, because when you have a boat, especially for larger corporations, but when you have a boat and it's going down, it takes a long time to steer and to turn that boat, right? So you really have to be out there asking questions, because it's not easy to always pivot. And so if you want to make a good pivot and make it at the right time, which a lot of us have had that experience during this last year, right? How do we pivot, and how do we pivot timely, right? I think that's something that's a strong trait of a great leader.
With the amount of time that we have left, because I know we're wrapping up, but I wanted to give you, Geri, time for this, because, we had mentioned some of what you're doing in the community. And for so many of those that are listening to this podcast, they know about Dale Carnegie, and they, know about some of the things that we do. But what I feel like the majority of people don't know is what we're doing in the community, more specifically here in Orange County. So in about a minute, let us know. And I know it's going to be tough because we don't have much time, but let us know what is Dale Carnegie Orange County, what are they doing in the community?
We've had a strong presence in the community pretty much right from the get-go. We started out supporting like the Boys and Girls Clubs, and we've come alongside Girls Inc., and we've created some programs to help our veterans. And, one that's really exciting, you mentioned that Brenda was on here before, right? We've come alongside of I-5, and, she has such a heart and passion for those that have been trafficked, right? And my partner, Steve, is amazing. He was able to take some of the content that we have and customize it specifically to address some of the needs to help those that have experienced trafficking. And one of our heart is to actually help those that have had those type of experiences to be very successful when they go into corporate America, right? Because if they fail, they go back into trafficking, and you hardly ever have a chance to get them out again. So we've been able to utilize our content to, help make a difference in those lives. We also take that into the Girl Scouts, where we've, helped some of not only the young Girl Scouts, we've helped the volunteers to overcome some of the challenges to help them be more successful so the girls could be more successful. We've then taken that into the Girl Scouts here of Orange County and helped them with some programs to hone their skill sets so they can be better leaders, so they can lead the volunteers, so that the volunteers can have the impact on the youth of our organization. So we've been able to do that, and we even come alongside the special needs community with Lighthouse, and our whole team did an outing at Angel Stadium with them and let them have the time of their lives up there. So we really believe in supporting the world around us in our community.
Thank you so much, Geri. And I know we don't have the time, but I would even, at some point on the next one, how you even got into leadership development and the story there, and seeing the need for leaders to grow. And as we've talked about, become the leader people want to follow. And on that note, Steve, I know if we've got someone that's listening today that's saying, hey, I'm ready to take some of those steps to build my leadership persona, my abilities. What are some of those practical things that you've got available that someone could tap into?
Definitely go ahead and visit us at ocdalecarnegie.com, where we work with a number of different organizations, ranging from manufacturing to technology, leaders, from engineers, exactly, ranging from with working with leaders ranging from senior level executives all the way down to first time managers. And so feel free to visit us. You can also give us a call as well at our number 949-833-3253. And Geri, I would like to take the opportunity to personally thank you, not only for joining us on the podcast, but for taking a risk on me and bringing me into the team so many years ago. I would not have encountered the level of success that I have if you were not in the picture, and if you and Steve didn't take a risk on me. So, I just want to say personally, thank you to you. It's because of, what you've invested in me that I've been able to partner with John and actually have the, confidence to do something like this. So thank you so much for joining us. Do look forward to having you back. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Join us next week. Remember, managers light a fire under people, while leaders light a fire in people. Have a great week.